basement door creaks open beneath my trembling hands, and the musty air hits my face like a wall of forgotten secrets. I can barely make out the wooden steps descending into darkness, but something down there is calling to me, something that will change everything I thought I knew about my family. The deed to my grandmother's farm sits crumpled in my back pocket, still warm from my sweaty palms. And I know that whatever I find in this basement will either complete the puzzle of my past or shatter it entirely. But let me back up because this story doesn't really start in a basement. It starts 3 weeks ago on my 18th birthday in the sterile hallway of Riverside Children's Home, where I'd spent the last 6 years of my life. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Mary Lewis, the head administrator, handed me a manila envelope with my name written in careful cursive across the front. "Jack Chavez," she said, her voice softer than usual. "This came for you yesterday. It's from a law firm in Cedar Valley." I remember staring at that envelope like it might bite me. In 18 years, I'd never received mail from anyone except social workers and court officials. My fingers shook as I tore it open, and inside was a letter that would turn my world upside down. The letter was from Gregory Wright, an attorney representing the estate of Ruth Bailey. My grandmother, a woman I'd never heard of, never knew existed, who had apparently been searching for me for years. According to the letter, she died 3 months earlier and left me her farm, all 40 acres of it, along with the house and everything in it. Before we see how this ends, tell us where you're watching from and hype this video in the comments. I must have read that letter 20 times before the words really sank in. I had family. Had family. Ruth Bailey was my mother's mother, and she'd been looking for me ever since my parents died in that car accident when I was 12. The letter explained that the foster system had lost track of me when I'd been moved between homes, and by the time she found me again, I was already established at Riverside. Mary Lewis sat down beside me on the worn vinyl bench in the hallway. "Jack, this is incredible news. A farm, land, a real inheritance. Do you know what this means?" I knew what it meant. It meant I didn't have to age out of the system with nothing but a garbage bag full of clothes and a few $100s in transitional assistance. It meant I had somewhere to go, something that belonged to me. But it also meant confronting the fact that while I'd been bouncing between foster homes and group facilities, I'd had a grandmother who was looking for me, who wanted me. The next morning, I called Gregory Wright's office. His secretary, Carol Martinez, was kind and patient as she explained the process. I'd need to come to Cedar Valley to sign the papers and take possession of the property. She arranged for a bus ticket and told me that Kyle, Chavez, no relation despite the shared last name, would pick me up from the station and drive me to the farm. The bus ride took 6 hours through rolling hills and farmland I'd never seen before. I pressed my face against the window and watched the landscape change from urban sprawl to small towns to open country. With each mile, I felt something loosening in my chest, like I was finally breathing after holding my breath for years. Kyle Chavez turned out to be a man in his 50s with calloused hands and kind eyes. He found me easily at the tiny Cedar Valley bus station, probably because I was the only person there under 70 with a duffel bag and a lost expression. "You must be Jack," he said, extending his hand. "I knew your grandmother. Ruth Bailey was a good woman, one of the best. I'm sorry for your loss." I shook his hand, not sure how to respond. How do you mourn someone you never knew but who apparently loved you enough to leave you everything she had? The drive to the farm took another 20 minutes through winding country roads lined with oak trees and split-rail fences. Kyle filled the silence with stories about Ruth Bailey, painting a picture of a woman who was tough as nails but had a soft spot for strays, both human and animal. "She never stopped talking about you," he said as we turned down a gravel driveway. "Always said she was going to find her grandson and bring him home where he belonged." And then I saw it. The house sat at the end of a long drive, a 2-story farmhouse with white clapboard siding and a wraparound porch. The paint was peeling in places, and the shutters needed work. But it was beautiful in a way that made my throat tight. Behind the house, I could see a red barn and several outbuildings, and beyond that, fields that stretched to the horizon. "She kept it all up herself until about 2 years ago," Kyle said, parking next to the porch steps. "After that, she hired Eric James to help with the heavy work, but she was still out there every day, checking on things. Gregory Wright was waiting for us on the porch, a tall man in his 60s wearing a suit that looked out of place in the rural setting. He stood as we approached, extending his hand with a warm smile. "Jack Chavez, I presume? I'm Gregory Wright. I'm so glad you could come." We went inside and I got my first look at what was now my home. The house was clean but felt frozen in time, like Ruth Bailey had just stepped out for a moment and would be back any minute. The furniture was old but well maintained, and every surface held evidence of a life fully lived. Photographs, books, small decorations that spoke of someone who cared about making a house feel like home. Gregory spread the paperwork across the kitchen table, explaining each document as I signed my name over and over. The deed, the will, insurance papers, tax information. It was overwhelming, but with each signature, the reality sank in deeper. This was mine, all of it. "Your grandmother left you a letter," Gregory said, pulling an envelope from his briefcase. "She asked me to give this to you personally." My hands shook as I opened it. The letter was written in the same careful cursive I'd seen on the envelope back at Riverside. "My dearest Jack," it began, "if you're reading this, then I'm gone, but you're finally home where you belong. I'm sorry I couldn't find you sooner. Sorry I couldn't be there for you when you needed family most. But I never stopped looking, never stopped hoping that someday you'd come home to the farm." The letter went on for 2 pages, telling me about my mother as a child, about the farm and its history, about all the things she'd wanted to share with me. At the end, she wrote something that made me have to set the letter down and walk outside for air. "I know you don't know me, and I know this must be overwhelming, but this farm has been in our family for 4 generations, and now it's yours. Take care of it, Jack. Make it your home. And know that even though we never met, I loved you every day of your life." Kyle and Gregory gave me space to process, standing quietly on the porch while I walked around the yard, trying to wrap my head around everything. The barn was bigger than it had looked from the road, with a loft full of hay and stalls that had been empty for years. The outbuildings included a workshop, a chicken coop, and a storage shed filled with farming equipment I didn't recognize. When I came back to the house, Gregory had more papers for me to sign, including documents that would transfer the property taxes to my name and authorize him to help me navigate the legal aspects of property ownership. "There's one more thing," he said, hesitating. "Your grandmother mentioned that there were some family documents and photographs stored in the basement. She said you should have them, that they'd help you understand your family history." That's when Kyle spoke up. "Ruth always said there were stories in that basement, things about your mother and your grandfather. She was planning to show you everything when she found you." After Gregory left and Kyle headed home with promises to check on me in a few days, I found myself alone in the house for the first time. The silence was different from the institutional quiet of Riverside. This was a peaceful silence, the kind that comes from being in a place where you belong. I spent the evening exploring the house room by room. The master bedroom had clearly been Ruth's, with a patchwork quilt on the bed and photographs on the dresser showing a woman with my mother's eyes and my own stubborn chin. The second bedroom had been set up as a guest room, but I could tell it hadn't been used in years. The kitchen was the heart of the house, with a big wooden table and chairs that looked like they'd hosted thousands of family meals. The living room had a stone fireplace and built-in bookshelves filled with everything from farming manuals to classic novels. But it was the basement door that kept drawing my attention. It was located off the kitchen, a simple wooden door painted white like all the others in the house. But every time I walked past it, I felt a pull, like there were answers waiting for me down there. On my second day at the farm, Ashley Morales stopped by. She was about my age with long dark hair and a friendly smile, and she introduced herself as Ruth's nearest neighbor. "I live about a mile down the road with my parents," she said, handing me a casserole dish. "My mom made this for you. She said you probably don't have much food yet." Ashley stayed for coffee and told me more about Ruth Bailey, filling in details that Kyle and Gregory hadn't mentioned. How Ruth had been a teacher before she retired to farm full-time. How she'd volunteered at the local food bank and never missed a church service. How she'd talked about her grandson constantly, showing anyone who would listen the one photograph she had of me from when I was 12. "She kept that picture on her refrigerator," Ashley said, right next to her shopping list and her doctor's appointments. She used to say you had your mother's eyes and your grandfather's determination. That night, I finally worked up the courage to open the basement door. The wooden steps creaked under my weight as I descended into the darkness, feeling along the wall for a light switch. When I found it and flipped it on, a single bare bulb illuminated a space that was clearly more than just storage. The basement had been finished with paneled walls and a concrete floor painted gray. But what caught my attention immediately were the boxes, dozens of them, neatly labeled and stacked along the walls. Family photos, 1950 to 1970. Margaret's school papers, wedding documents. Farm records, 1960 to 1980. I opened the box labeled Margaret's school papers first, knowing that Margaret had been my mother's name. Inside were report cards, essays, art projects, and photographs that showed a girl who looked exactly like me growing up on the same farm. There were pictures of her feeding chickens, riding horses, helping with harvest, always smiling, always surrounded by the same landscape I now called home. But it was the box labeled Letters Personal that stopped me cold. Inside were dozens of envelopes, some yellowed with age, others more recent. As I sorted through them, I realized they were letters my grandmother had written but never sent. Letters to me. The first letter was dated just 2 months after my parents' funeral. "Dear Jack," it began, "I don't know where you are, but I'm going to keep writing to you until I find you. Today I went to the courthouse and filed more papers, trying to get information about where they placed you. The social worker says it might take time, but I won't give up." There were letters for every birthday I'd missed, every Christmas, every major holiday. Letters describing changes to the farm, updates on neighbors, stories about my mother growing up. Letters full of love and longing from a woman who'd been searching for me while I'd been growing up, believing I had no family left in the world. One letter dated just 6 months before she died made me sit down hard on an old wooden crate. "Dear Jack, I'm getting older and I'm scared I won't find you in time. But I want you to know that this farm is yours no matter what. I've made sure of that in my will. Someday you'll come home, and when you do, you'll find a place that's been waiting for you your whole life." I spent hours in that basement, reading letters and looking through photographs. There were pictures of my grandfather, a tall man with kind eyes who died when my mother was in high school. Pictures of my mother's wedding, her graduation from college, holidays and birthdays, and ordinary moments that made up a life. But it was in the box labeled Family History that I found the documents that would change everything. Birth certificates, marriage licenses, property deeds going back 4 generations. And at the bottom of the box, a manila envelope with my name written across it in Ruth's careful handwriting. Inside was a letter dated just 1 month before she died, along with several legal documents I didn't understand at first. The letter explained everything. "Jack, if you're reading this, then you found your way home and you're learning about your family. But there's something else you need to know, something I should have told you in person but ran out of time for. The farm isn't just your inheritance, it's your birthright. Your great-great-grandfather, Samuel Bailey, was granted this land in 1892 as part of a homestead program. Every generation since then has worked this soil, and now it's your turn." The legal documents were original land grants, survey maps, and water rights papers. But the most important document was a trust agreement that Ruth had established years earlier. The farm wasn't just mine to own, it was mine to preserve. The trust ensured that the land would stay in the family, that it could never be sold to developers or corporations. "This land has stories, Jack," the letter continued. "Stories about droughts and floods, good years and bad years, about people who worked hard and loved deeply. Your mother used to say she could hear those stories in the wind through the wheat fields. I hope you'll listen for them too." I stayed in that basement until dawn, reading every letter, looking at every photograph, trying to absorb 18 years worth of family history in one night. When I finally climbed back upstairs, the sun was coming up over the fields, painting everything golden. That morning, Eric James stopped by to introduce himself. He was a man in his 40s with sun-weathered skin and the easy confidence of someone who'd spent his life working with his hands. He'd been helping Ruth maintain the farm for the past 2 years, and he offered to continue working for me if I wanted. Your grandmother was planning to plant corn in the south field this spring, he said as we walked the property together. The soil's been resting for 2 years, so it should be good and fertile. But it's up to you now. This is your land. My land. The words still felt foreign in my mouth, but they were starting to feel more real with each passing day. Eric showed me how to check the irrigation system, how to start the old tractor, how to read the subtle signs that told you what the land needed. Farming's not just about planting and harvesting, he said as we stood at the edge of the south field. It's about understanding the rhythm of the seasons, learning to work with the weather instead of against it. Your grandmother understood that. She had a feel for the land that you can't learn from books. That afternoon, Gary Hernandez, the local feed store owner, stopped by to welcome me to the community. He was a stocky man with graying hair and a firm handshake, and he brought with him a wealth of knowledge about farming in the area. Ruth Bailey was one of our best customers, he said, settling into a chair on the front porch. Always paid her bills on time, always treated my employees with respect. She used to say that farming was about more than making money, it was about being a steward of the land. Gary offered to help me understand the business side of farming, from crop insurance to marketing agreements to equipment loans. It was overwhelming at first, but I was starting to realize that I wasn't alone in this. The community that had embraced my grandmother was ready to embrace me too. That evening, I called Kimberly Wood, a social worker from Riverside who'd always been kind to me. I wanted her to know that I was okay, that the inheritance was real, that I finally had a place to call home. Jack, I'm so happy for you, she said, and I could hear the genuine warmth in her voice. You deserve this. You deserve a family and a home and a future. As I hung up the phone, I realized that for the first time in my life, I was starting to believe that too. The farm was teaching me things about myself that I'd never known. I was stronger than I'd thought, more capable of hard work, more ready for responsibility than anyone had given me credit for. But it was the letters in the basement that were teaching me the most important lesson of all. I wasn't alone. I'd never been alone. Even when I'd felt most abandoned, most forgotten, there had been someone out there loving me, searching for me, preparing a place for me to call home. Over the next few weeks, I fell into a routine that felt more natural than anything I'd ever experienced. I'd wake up before dawn and walk the property, checking on things the way Eric had taught me. The fields, the barn, the equipment, the fence lines. There was always something that needed attention, always some small task that connected me more deeply to the land. Eric came by 3 times a week to help with the heavier work and to continue my education in farming. He was patient with my questions and generous with his knowledge, treating me like the heir to something valuable rather than just another kid who had gotten lucky. Your grandmother used to say that the land would teach you what you needed to know, he told me one morning as we repaired a section of fence. But you have to be willing to listen. I was learning to listen, to the sound of the wind through the wheat that was starting to sprout in the south field, to the rhythm of the seasons and the subtle changes that told you when it was time to plant, time to water, time to harvest, to the stories that seemed to whisper from every corner of the property. Ashley Morales became a regular visitor, stopping by most evenings after she finished her job at the local veterinary clinic. She'd grown up on a farm too, and she helped me understand the social dynamics of rural life, the unspoken rules and expectations that govern relationships in a farming community. People here judge you by your actions, not your words, she explained one evening as we sat on the front porch watching the sunset. They're watching to see if you're going to take care of the place, if you're going to be a good neighbor, if you're going to honor what your grandmother built here. I was determined to do exactly that. Every morning I read one of Ruth's letters from the basement, using her words as guidance for the day ahead. Every evening I walked the property and thought about the 4 generations of my family who'd done the same thing, who'd watched the same sunsets and worried about the same weather patterns. The community was slowly accepting me, but I could tell they were still reserving judgment. At the feed store, conversations would pause when I walked in, then resume with careful politeness. At the diner in town, people were friendly but distant, waiting to see what kind of man I would become. It was Gary Hernandez who finally explained the dynamic to me. Your grandmother was respected here because she earned it, he said during one of our conversations. She proved herself through years of hard work and community involvement. Now people are wondering if you're cut from the same cloth. I understood. Respect had to be earned. Belonging had to be proven. I was the outsider, the city kid who'd inherited something precious. They wanted to make sure I was worthy of it. The test came sooner than I expected. In early May, a late frost threatened to kill the corn crop that Eric and I had planted in the south field. I woke up at 3 in the morning to find the temperature dropping fast and a clear sky that meant no cloud cover to hold in the heat. Eric arrived at dawn to find me already in the field, using every piece of equipment we had to create air circulation and prevent the frost from settling. I'd been out there for hours, moving sprinklers, starting smudge pots, doing everything I could think of to protect the crop. You have called me, he said, but I could see the approval in his eyes. This is my responsibility now, I replied, and I meant it. We saved most of the crop, but more importantly, word spread through the community that the Bailey boy had spent the night fighting for his corn, that he cared enough about the land to lose sleep over it, to get his hands dirty, to do whatever it took to protect what was his. After that, conversations at the feed store didn't pause when I walked in. People started asking my opinion about weather patterns and crop prices. Gary Hernandez began introducing me as Jack Bailey instead of Ruth's grandson, a small change that meant everything. But it was the discovery I made in late May that really changed everything. I was cleaning out the workshop behind the barn when I found a wooden crate hidden behind some old equipment. Inside were more letters, but these weren't from Ruth to me. These were letters from my mother to Ruth, written during the years after I was born. The letters painted a picture of a young woman struggling with marriage and motherhood, grateful for her mother's support, but determined to make her own way in the world. They talked about me as a baby, as a toddler, sharing stories and milestones that Ruth had treasured. But it was the last letter, dated just a month before my parents' accident, that broke my heart and healed it at the same time. Mom, I know we haven't always seen eye to eye, but I want you to know how grateful I am for everything you taught me about hard work and family and taking care of the people you love. I'm trying to teach Jack those same values, and someday I want to bring him to the farm so he can learn them from you too. She'd been planning to bring me home. My mother had wanted me to know my grandmother, to learn about the farm, to understand where I came from. The accident had stolen that opportunity, but somehow, 18 years later, I'd found my way home anyway. That night, I called Ashley and asked if she wanted to take a walk around the property. We'd been spending more time together, and I was starting to realize that what I felt for her was more than friendship. She was part of this place, part of the community I was learning to belong to, and she understood the rhythm of rural life in a way that made me feel less alone. Tell me about your grandmother, she said as we walked through the fields under a canopy of stars. I told her about the letters, about the years Ruth had spent searching for me, about the love that had been waiting for me even when I didn't know it existed. Ashley listened without interrupting, and when I was finished, she took my hand. She would be so proud of you, she said, the way you've taken care of this place, the way you've become part of the community. You're exactly the grandson she dreamed of finding. Summer brought the kind of heat that made the air shimmer over the fields and taught me new lessons about the patience required for farming. The corn was growing tall and green, and Eric pronounced it one of the best crops he'd seen in years. But more than the success of the harvest, it was the daily routine of caring for the land that was changing me. I'd wake up before sunrise and walk the fence lines, checking for damage from the previous night's storms or wandering cattle from neighboring farms. I'd inspect the irrigation system, making sure every plant was getting the water it needed. I'd spend hours in the workshop, learning to repair equipment and maintain the tools that kept the farm running. But it was the evenings that I treasured most. After the work was done and the sun was setting over the fields, I'd sit on the front porch and read more of Ruth's letters. Each one taught me something new about my family, about the history of the land, about the woman who'd loved me from a distance for so many years. In one letter, she described my great-grandfather Samuel, the man who'd first claimed this land. He was a dreamer, she wrote, but he was also practical. He understood that dreams without hard work are just wishes. He built this farm with his own hands, cleared the fields stone by stone, and never complained about the difficulty of it. In another, she talked about the drought of 1980, when the corn crop failed and They almost lost the farm. But we didn't give up, she wrote. We tightened our belts, took out loans, and planted again the next year. That's what you do when you love something. You fight for it. I was learning to fight for it too. When a section of irrigation pipe burst in July, I spent 2 days in the blazing sun replacing it, determined to fix it myself rather than hire someone else to do the work. When a windstorm damaged the barn roof, I climbed up there with Eric and learned how to replace shingles and repair structural damage. The community was taking notice. At the 4th of July barbecue in town, people sought me out to talk about farming, asking my opinion on everything from crop rotation to equipment purchases. Gary Hernandez introduced me to other farmers, men and women who'd been working the land for decades and who were willing to share their knowledge with someone they now considered a peer. You're becoming one of us, Ashley told me that night as we watched fireworks from the bed of my pickup truck. I can see it in the way people talk to you, the way they include you in their conversations. You're not the outsider anymore. She was right. Somewhere between the late-night frost protection and the daily routine of farm work, I'd stopped being Ruth Bailey's unknown grandson and started being Jack Bailey, farmer. The transformation hadn't been sudden or dramatic, but it had been complete. In August, I received a call that would test everything I'd learned about belonging and community. A development company from the city wanted to buy the farm, offering 3 times what the land was worth for agricultural purposes. They wanted to build a shopping center and housing development, turning 40 acres of productive farmland into another suburban sprawl. The offer was tempting in a way that scared me. 3 times the land's value would set me up for life, would give me financial security I'd never dreamed of having. I could go to college, travel, live anywhere I wanted without worrying about money. But as I stood in the south field, watching the corn sway in the evening breeze, I knew I couldn't do it. This wasn't just land to me anymore. It was home. It was family history. It was the place where 4 generations of my ancestors had worked and lived and loved. I called Gregory Wright to make sure the trust agreement Ruth had established would protect the farm from development. He assured me that the legal protections were solid, but he also wanted to make sure I understood what I was giving up. Jack, that's a lot of money, he said, enough to secure your future in ways that farming never could. Are you sure you want to turn it down? I was sure. That night, I called the development company and declined their offer. I told them the farm wasn't for sale, that it would never be for sale, that it was going to remain agricultural land for as long as I had anything to say about it. The next morning, Eric arrived to find me already in the field, checking on the corn that would be ready for harvest in a few weeks. He didn't say anything about the development offer, but I could tell he'd heard about it through the community grapevine. Your grandmother would be proud, he said finally. She always said this land was worth more than money could measure. The harvest that fall was everything Eric had predicted. The corn came in heavy and golden, filling the storage bins and providing enough income to pay the property taxes, buy new equipment, and start planning for the next year's crops. But more than the financial success, it was the satisfaction of bringing in a crop I'd planted and tended myself that made me understand why my ancestors had chosen this life. Ashley was there for every step of the harvest, helping where she could and celebrating each milestone with the enthusiasm of someone who understood what it meant. We'd grown closer over the summer, and I was starting to think about a future that included her, that included building a life together on the farm. I love watching you work, she told me one evening as we sat on the porch after a long day in the fields. You found something that fits you perfectly. You belong here in a way that some people never find anywhere. She was right. I did belong here. Not just because I'd inherited the land, but because I'd earned my place on it. Through sweat and worry and dedication, through learning to listen to the rhythms of the seasons and the needs of the soil, I'd become the kind of person who deserved to call this place home. As autumn settled over the farm and the leaves on the oak trees turned gold and red, I found myself reflecting on the transformation that had taken place in just 6 months. The scared 18-year-old who'd stepped off the bus in Cedar Valley was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized but was proud to be. The harvest was complete, the equipment was cleaned and stored for winter, and the fields lay fallow under the November sky. But instead of feeling empty, the land felt peaceful, resting and gathering strength for another year of growth. I was learning that farming was as much about patience as it was about hard work, as much about trusting the natural cycles as it was about forcing your will on the land. I'd started attending the monthly meetings of the local Farmers Association, where I was no longer the youngest person in the room trying to prove himself, but a contributing member with opinions worth hearing. Gary Hernandez had asked me to join the board of directors, a honor that would have been unthinkable just a few months earlier. You bring a fresh perspective, he explained when I expressed surprise at the invitation. But you also understand tradition and the importance of preserving what works. That's a rare combination. The board position would give me a voice in decisions that affected the entire farming community, from lobbying for agricultural subsidies to organizing cooperative purchasing agreements. It was a responsibility I took seriously, understanding that I was representing not just my own interests, but the interests of everyone who'd chosen to make their living from the land. Ashley and I had grown even closer as the year progressed, and I was starting to think seriously about asking her to marry me. She understood the demands of farm life, the way the weather and the seasons dictated your schedule, the satisfaction that came from working with your hands and seeing the direct results of your labor. I've been thinking about the future, I told her one evening as we walked through the bare fields under a canopy of stars. About what I want my life to look like in 5 years, 10 years. And what do you see? She asked, her breath visible in the cold air. I see this farm thriving. I see new buildings, maybe some livestock, definitely more acreage under cultivation. I see a family, kids who grow up understanding where their food comes from and what it means to take care of the land. She stopped walking and turned to face me. Is that a proposal, Jack Bailey? It wasn't, not officially, but it was a promise. A promise that I was ready to build a life here, to put down roots as deep as the oak trees that had shaded this land for generations. A promise that I'd found not just a place to live, but a place to belong. That winter, I spent long hours in the basement, reading through the rest of Ruth's letters and organizing the family documents into a proper archive. I found photographs I'd missed before, letters from relatives I'd never known existed, documents that traced the Bailey family history back to Ireland, and the potato famine that had driven my ancestors to America. But it was a letter I found tucked inside an old Bible that brought everything full circle. It was written by my great-great-grandfather Samuel Bailey in 1892, just after he'd claimed the homestead land. To my descendants, it began, I am writing this letter to tell you about the land I have claimed and the dreams I have for our family's future. This soil is rich and good, and with hard work and God's blessing, it will provide for generations to come. But more than that, this land will be a home, a place where our children can grow up knowing they belong somewhere, knowing they are part of something bigger than themselves. The letter went on to describe his vision for the farm, his hopes for his children and grandchildren, his belief that the land would be both a responsibility and a blessing for everyone who inherited it. At the end, he wrote something that made me understand why Ruth had been so determined to find me. I pray that this land will always remain in our family, that it will be passed down from parent to child, generation to generation, as a reminder of where we came from and what we can accomplish when we work together. May everyone who inherits this land understand that they are not just owners, but stewards, caretakers of something precious that must be preserved for those who come after. I was the fifth generation to inherit that responsibility, and I was determined to honor it. That spring, I expanded the operation, planting soybeans in the North Field and adding a small herd of cattle to help diversify the farm's income. Eric continued to work with me, but now as a partner rather than just an employee, sharing in both the profits and the decision-making. The community had fully embraced me by then, but it was the visit from a group of foster kids from the city that really showed me how far I'd come. Kimberly Wood had called to ask if I'd be willing to host a day trip for teenagers who were aging out of the system, giving them a chance to see what was possible when someone believed in their potential. 12 kids stepped off the bus that day, looking exactly like I had a year earlier. Suspicious, guarded, trying not to hope for too much. I spent the day showing them around the farm, explaining how the operation worked, sharing my story of going from foster care to farm ownership. The most important thing I learned, I told them as we sat in the barn during a lunch break, is that family isn't just about blood. It's about the people who choose to care about you, who invest in your future, who believe in you even when you don't believe in yourself. One of the kids, a 17-year-old girl named Maria, stayed after the others had gone back to the bus. "Do you really think someone like me could do this?" she asked. "Could have a place like this someday?" I looked at her and saw myself a year earlier, hungry for belonging, but afraid to believe it was possible. "I think you can do anything you set your mind to," I told her. "But more than that, I think you deserve to have people who believe in you, who support your dreams, who help you build the life you want." Before she left, I gave her my phone number and told her to call me if she ever needed advice or just someone to talk to. 6 months later, she did call to tell me she'd been accepted to agricultural college on a full scholarship. She was going to study sustainable farming and someday hoped to have her own operation. "You showed me it was possible," she said. "You showed me that people like us can have real homes, real families, real futures." That conversation reminded me of something Ruth had written in one of her letters. The greatest gift we can give someone is the belief that they matter, that they belong somewhere, that their life has value and purpose. I'd received that gift from her, even though we'd never met, and now I was passing it on to others. By the second anniversary of my arrival at the farm, the transformation was complete in ways I couldn't have imagined when I first stepped off that bus in Cedar Valley. The scared, lonely teenager who'd grown up believing he had no family and no future had become a man with deep roots and clear purpose. Ashley and I had married the previous spring in a ceremony held right there on the farm, surrounded by the community that had become our extended family. Gary Hernandez walked her down the aisle, since her father had passed away years earlier, and Eric served as my best man. Ruth's old pastor, now retired, performed the ceremony under the oak trees that had shaded the property for over a century. The wedding was everything I'd never dared to dream of, a celebration of love and commitment witnessed by people who cared about our future, held in a place that represented home and belonging and continuity. As I watched Ashley walk toward me in her grandmother's wedding dress, I thought about all the paths that had led us to that moment, all the choices and chances and acts of love that had brought us together. We'd expanded the farm operation significantly, adding a greenhouse for winter vegetables and a small orchard that would provide fruit for local markets. Ashley had started a farmer's market business, selling our produce directly to consumers who appreciated knowing where their food came from and how it was grown. But perhaps the most meaningful addition was the scholarship fund we'd established in Ruth's name. Every year, we provided financial assistance to young people aging out of foster care who wanted to pursue careers in agriculture. It was our way of honoring the gift Ruth had given me and ensuring that other kids like me would have opportunities to build meaningful lives. The first recipient was Maria, the girl who'd visited the farm with that group of foster kids. She graduated from agricultural college and was now working as an extension agent, helping small farmers improve their operations and increase their sustainability. She visited the farm regularly, and we'd become close friends, bonded by our shared experience of growing up without family and finding our place in the world. "I never thought I'd have a job I loved," she told me during one of her visits. "Growing up in foster care, I just hoped I'd find something that paid the bills. But this work, helping farmers, working with the land, it feeds my soul in a way I never expected." Her success reminded me of something I'd learned over the past 2 years. When you give people opportunities and believe in their potential, amazing things can happen. The scholarship fund had helped 6 young people so far, and each one had gone on to make meaningful contributions to their communities. The farm itself had become a model of sustainable agriculture, using practices that honored the land while maximizing productivity. We'd implemented crop rotation systems that improved soil health, installed solar panels that reduced our energy costs, and developed water conservation techniques that protected this precious resource for future generations. Eric had become a full partner in the operation, bringing decades of experience and a deep understanding of the local climate and soil conditions. Together, we'd increase the farm's profitability while also increasing its environmental sustainability, proving that good stewardship and good business could go hand in hand. "Your grandmother would be amazed at what you've accomplished," Eric told me one evening as we walked through the fields, checking on the late summer crops. She always believed this land had potential, but I don't think even she imagined it could support this level of production while also supporting the community the way you do. The community support he mentioned had grown organically from our success. We employed several local residents during planting and harvest seasons, providing jobs in an area where good employment opportunities were sometimes scarce. We donated produce to the local food bank and hosted educational tours for school groups, teaching children about agriculture and environmental stewardship. But it was the personal relationships that meant the most to me. The neighbors who stopped by to share coffee and conversation, the other farmers who called for advice or offered help during difficult times, the kids from town who came to help with chores and learn about farm life. I'd found the family I'd always wanted, not through blood relationships, but through the bonds created by shared work, mutual respect, and genuine caring. These people had seen me at my worst and my best, had supported me through challenges and celebrated my successes, had become the brothers and sisters and parents and grandparents I'd never had. Ashley was pregnant with our first child, a baby who would be the sixth generation to call this land home. As I watched her belly grow and felt the baby kick against my hand, thought about the legacy we were creating, the stories this child would grow up hearing, the connection to the land and to family history that would shape their identity from birth. I want to tell them about Ruth, Ashley said one evening as we sat on the front porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink, about how she never stopped looking for you, how she kept this place ready for you to come home. I want them to understand that love can transcend time and distance, that family is about more than just being related. I wanted that too. I wanted our children to grow up knowing they were part of something bigger than themselves, part of a story that stretched back generations and would continue long after we were gone. I wanted them to understand the responsibility that came with inheriting this land, but also the joy and satisfaction that came from caring for it. The basement had become a proper family archive, with all the letters and photographs and documents organized and preserved for future generations. I'd added my own letters to the collection, writing to the children Ashley and I would have, documenting the restoration of the farm and the rebuilding of our family's connection to this place. Someday, I wrote in one of those letters, you'll read these words and try to imagine what it was like for me to arrive here with nothing but a duffel bag and a heart full of hope. I want you to know that this farm saved me in every way a person can be saved. It gave me purpose, community, love, and a future I could believe in. The birth of our daughter, Emma, 3 years after my arrival at the farm, marked another milestone in the journey from abandonment to belonging. Holding her in my arms for the first time, looking into eyes that carried the genetic legacy of 5 generations of Baileys, I understood in a way I never had before what Ruth had meant when she talked about continuity and family responsibility. Emma Ruth Bailey, named for the grandmother who'd never stopped believing I'd come home, represented everything I'd gained and everything I hoped to pass on. As I walked the fields with her strapped to my chest in those early months, I told her the stories Ruth had told me through her letters, pointing out the landmarks that would shape her childhood just as they'd shaped her mother's and great-grandmother's. That's the oak tree where your great-great-great-grandfather Samuel used to rest during the heat of the day, I'd tell her as we passed the massive tree that dominated the front yard. And that's the barn where your great-grandmother Ruth learned to milk cows when she was just a little older than you are now. The farm had become more than just a successful agricultural operation. It had become a gathering place for the extended community we'd built. Sunday dinners regularly included Eric and his wife, Gary Hernandez and his family, Ashley's parents, and whoever else needed a place to belong for a few hours. Maria had become Emma's honorary aunt, visiting regularly and helping with childcare when Ashley and I both needed to be in the fields. She'd started her own small farm operation on land she'd purchased with help from our scholarship fund, and we often coordinated our planting and harvesting schedules to help each other during the busiest times. I never had siblings growing up, she told Ashley one Sunday as she helped Emma take her first steps across the kitchen floor. But now I feel like I have a whole family, people who care about my success and share in my struggles. That was exactly what Ruth had envisioned when she'd written about the farm being a place where people could belong. Not just the people who inherited the land, but the people who were drawn to it, who found in its community and purpose something they'd been missing in their own lives. The scholarship fund had expanded to support 12 students annually, and we'd started hosting an annual reunion where past recipients could share their experiences and current students could learn from their successes. The event had grown into a weekend-long celebration that brought together foster kids, farmers, community leaders, and anyone else who believed in the power of opportunity and mentorship. This is what Ruth dreamed of, Gregory Wright told me during one of these reunions. He was in his 70s now, but still sharp, still committed to helping young people navigate the legal complexities of property ownership and business development. She wanted this place to be a beacon of hope for kids who'd grown up without family support. The farm's success had attracted attention from agricultural colleges and sustainable farming organizations, and we regularly hosted research projects and educational programs. But we were careful to maintain the balance between being a working farm and being a teaching facility, ensuring that our primary responsibility remained to the land and to the community that depended on it. Ashley had developed the farmers market business into a regional operation, supplying restaurants and grocery stores with organic produce grown using the sustainable methods we'd perfected over the years. Her business acumen complemented my farming skills perfectly, and together we'd built something that was both profitable and principled. We're not just growing food, she often told the college students who came to study our operation. We're growing community, growing opportunities, growing hope for people who need to believe that their lives can be different. Emma was walking now, toddling through the fields and barns with the fearless curiosity of a child who'd never known anything but safety and belonging. She had Ruth's eyes and my stubborn chin, and already showed signs of the determination that seemed to run in the Bailey bloodline. Watching her explore the farm that would someday be hers, I thought about the cycle of inheritance and responsibility that connected her to Samuel Bailey and all the generations in between. She would grow up knowing exactly where she came from, understanding her place in a story that stretched back over a century, secure in the knowledge that she was loved and valued and expected to contribute to something bigger than herself. But more than that, she would grow up understanding that family isn't just about blood relations, that community is something you build through shared work and mutual care, that belonging is something you earn through dedication and service to others. The basement archive had grown to include video interviews with community elders, recorded stories about the farm's history, and documentation of all the young people who'd been helped by the scholarship fund. It was becoming a comprehensive record of what could happen when people chose to invest in each other, when they decided that everyone deserved a chance to belong somewhere. On quiet evenings, after Emma was asleep and the day's work was done, Ashley and I would sit on the front porch and talk about the future, about the additional land we hoped to purchase, the new programs we wanted to develop, the legacy we were building for our daughter and the children who would come after her. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if Ruth hadn't found you?" Ashley asked one night as we watched lightning bugs dance across the fields. I did think about it sometimes, but not with regret or fear. I thought about it with gratitude for the path that had led me here, for the grandmother who'd never stopped believing I'd come home, for the community that had embraced me, for the land that had taught me who I was meant to be. I think everything happened exactly the way it was supposed to, I told her. All the pain and loneliness and uncertainty, it was all leading me here to this place, to this life, to this family we've built together. 5 years had passed since I'd first walked through the basement door and discovered the letters that would change my understanding of family and belonging. Emma was now a confident 4-year-old who knew every inch of the farm and could identify different crops by their leaves, and Ashley was pregnant with our second child. The farm had evolved into something that exceeded even Ruth's ambitious dreams. We now operated 160 acres, having purchased adjacent properties from retiring farmers who wanted to ensure their land remained in agricultural use. The scholarship fund supported 20 students annually, and we'd established a mentorship program that paired current recipients with successful graduates. But perhaps the most meaningful development was the addition of a small cemetery on the hill overlooking the south field, where we'd moved Ruth's remains from the town cemetery so she could rest on the land she'd loved. Samuel Bailey was buried there too, along with other family members who'd called this place home over the past century. Emma often asked to visit Great-Grandma Ruth's garden, as she called the cemetery, and I'd tell her stories about the woman who'd made it all possible. How Ruth had searched for me for years, how she'd kept the farm running even when it was difficult, how she'd believed in the power of family and community to transform lives. "Will I take care of the farm someday, Daddy?" Emma asked during one of these visits, her small hand clasped in mine as we stood beside Ruth's headstone. "If you want to," I told her, "but first you'll need to learn everything you can about the land, about farming, about taking care of the people who depend on this place. It's a big responsibility, but also a great privilege." The mentorship program had become one of our most successful initiatives, pairing young people from foster care with established farmers and agricultural professionals. Maria had become the program coordinator, using her own experience to help other young adults navigate the transition from institutional care to independent living. "The most important thing we give them isn't money or job training," she explained to a group of social workers who'd come to study our program. "It's the belief that they belong somewhere, that their lives have value and purpose, that they can build families and communities of their own." The program had a 90% success rate, with graduates going on to careers in agriculture, environmental science, rural development, and related fields. But more than professional success, they'd found something many foster kids never experience: a sense of belonging, a place where they were known and valued and expected to contribute. One of our most successful graduates was Kyle Thompson, who'd aged out of foster care at 18 with no family connections and no clear direction for his future. The scholarship fund had supported his education in agricultural engineering, and he'd returned to establish a business designing sustainable irrigation systems for small farms. "This place saved my life," he told me during the annual reunion. "Not just financially, but emotionally, spiritually. You showed me that people like us can have real homes, real families, real impact on the world." Kyle had married one of his classmates, and they were expecting their first child, continuing the cycle of healing and hope that Ruth had initiated when she'd first started searching for me. Their story, like mine, proved that family isn't just about genetics. That home isn't just about the place you're born. That belonging is something you can create through dedication and love. The farm's reputation for sustainable practices and community engagement had attracted visitors from around the world, and we regularly hosted international delegations studying rural development and agricultural education. But we never lost sight of our primary mission: caring for the land and the people who depended on it. Ashley had been elected to the County Planning Commission, where she advocated for policies that protected agricultural land from development and supported beginning farmers. Her work complemented our on-farm efforts perfectly, addressing the systemic challenges that made it difficult for young people to enter agriculture. "We can't just help individuals," she explained to a group of policymakers who'd come to visit. "We have to change the systems that create barriers for people who want to farm, who want to live in rural communities, who want to build the kind of life we've built here." The second baby arrived in early spring, a son we named Samuel after the ancestor who'd first claimed this land. Like his sister, he would grow up knowing exactly where he belonged, understanding his place in a story that stretched back generations and would continue long after we were gone. Holding Samuel in the same barn where Ruth had learned to milk cows, where my mother had played as a child, where Emma had taken her first steps, I felt the weight and joy of continuity. This place had shaped my identity, given me purpose, connected me to something larger than myself, and now it would do the same for my children. The basement archive had grown into a proper family museum, with displays showing the farm's evolution over 5 generations, documentation of all the young people who'd been helped by our programs, and interactive exhibits that taught visitors about sustainable agriculture and rural community development. School groups came regularly for educational tours, and Emma had become our youngest tour guide, proudly showing other children the chickens and goats we'd added to diversify the operation. She had an intuitive understanding of the farm's rhythms and a natural ability to explain complex concepts in simple terms. "This is where we grow the corn that becomes the food you eat," she'd tell wide-eyed kindergartners. "And this is where the cows live that give us milk for your cereal. Everything is connected, just like people in a family. Her words reminded me of something Ruth had written in one of her letters. The land teaches us that everything is connected, that we're all part of something bigger than ourselves, that our actions have consequences that ripple through generations. That understanding had become the foundation of everything we did on the farm, from the crops we chose to grow, to the people we chose to help, to the legacy we were building for the future. 10 years after stepping off that bus in Cedar Valley, I stood in the same spot where I'd first seen the farm. But everything had changed. The house had been restored to its original beauty, with fresh paint and new shutters and a wraparound porch that welcomed visitors from around the world. The barn had been expanded and modernized while maintaining its historic character, and the fields stretched to the horizon, green and productive and sustainable. But the most important changes weren't visible in the buildings or the landscape. They were in the lives that had been touched, the families that had been created, the community that had grown up around the simple idea that everyone deserves a place to belong. Emma was now 9 years old, confident and capable, already showing the leadership qualities that would serve her well when she inherited the responsibility for this place. Samuel was 5, curious and energetic, fascinated by the machinery and animals that made the farm operation possible. They were growing up with advantages I'd never had: stability, security, and the absolute certainty that they were loved and valued and expected to contribute to something meaningful. Ashley and I had welcomed a third child, a daughter we named Margaret after my mother, completing our family and ensuring that the next generation would have siblings to share the joys and responsibilities of farm life. Margaret was just 2 years old, but already showed signs of the Bailey determination, insisting on helping with chores that were far beyond her capabilities. The scholarship fund had evolved into a comprehensive rural youth development program, supporting not just college education, but also vocational training, entrepreneurship development, and community leadership programs. We now had graduates working in agriculture, renewable energy, rural healthcare, education, and dozens of other fields that strengthened rural communities. Maria had been promoted to state extension director, overseeing agricultural education programs across the entire region. She'd never married, dedicating herself instead to the mission of helping young people build successful lives in rural areas. But she remained a constant presence in our children's lives, the aunt they'd never had by blood, but who loved them as fiercely as any biological relative could. "I've been thinking about retirement," Eric told me one morning as we checked on the new solar array that now provided most of the farm's electricity. He was in his 60s now, still strong and capable, but ready to step back from the day-to-day operations. "What would you like to do?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "I'd like to work with the scholarship kids," he said. "Teach them the practical skills they need to succeed in agriculture. Share what I've learned over 40 years of farming." It was perfect. Eric's knowledge and experience would be invaluable to young people entering agriculture, and his patient teaching style would help them develop both technical skills and the deeper understanding of land stewardship that couldn't be learned from textbooks. The farm had become a model for sustainable agriculture and rural community development, but we'd never lost sight of the personal relationships that made it all meaningful. Sunday dinners still brought together our extended family of neighbors, employees, scholarship recipients, and anyone else who needed a place to belong for a few hours. Gary Hernandez, now in his 70s, still stopped by regularly to share coffee and conversation, though he'd turned the feed store over to his son. Gregory Wright had passed away the previous year, but his law firm continued to provide legal support for our programs, honoring his commitment to helping young people navigate the complexities of property ownership and business development. The community had grown and changed over the decade, but the values that had welcomed me remained strong: hard work, mutual support, respect for the land, and the belief that everyone deserved a chance to build a meaningful life. New families had moved to the area, drawn by the economic opportunities created by our expanded operations and the quality of life that came from living in a place where neighbors still cared about each other. "I never imagined it would grow into this," Ashley said one evening as we walked through the fields, watching our children chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. "When you first told me about Ruth's letters, I thought it was a beautiful story about one family's connection to the land. I didn't realize we were building something that would touch so many lives. Neither had I, but that was the power of Ruth's vision. She'd understood that healing one person could create ripples that extended far beyond that individual, that providing opportunities for young people could strengthen entire communities, that investing in the land meant investing in the future. The basement archive had become a research center for scholars studying rural development, foster care outcomes, and sustainable agriculture. But it remained, first and foremost, a family museum where our children could learn about their heritage and understand their place in a story that stretched back over a century. Emma had become the unofficial family historian, helping to organize the collection and conduct interviews with community elders. She had an intuitive understanding of the importance of preserving stories, of maintaining connections between past and future, of ensuring that the lessons learned by one generation weren't lost to the next. "Why did Great-Grandma Ruth keep looking for you?" she asked me one afternoon as we sorted through a box of old photographs. "Because she believed in the power of family," I told her. "Not just the family you are born into, but the family you choose, the family you create through love and commitment and shared responsibility." That belief had become the foundation of everything we'd built, the principle that guided every decision we made about the farm, the programs, the community we were creating. It was Ruth's greatest gift to me, and through me, to everyone whose life had been touched by this place. As I tucked Emma and Samuel and Margaret into their beds that night, reading them stories about brave children and magical farms and families who loved each other despite their differences, I thought about the scared 18-year-old who'd once believed he had no family and no future. That boy could never have imagined this life, a thriving farm, a loving wife, 3 healthy children, a community that looked to him for leadership, and the knowledge that his life had meaning and purpose beyond his wildest dreams. But Ruth had imagined it. In all those letters she'd written but never sent, in all those years of searching and hoping and preparing, she'd imagined exactly this: a family reunited, a farm restored, a community strengthened, and a legacy that would continue for generations to come. Standing here now, 15 years later, I can barely recognize the broken kid who stepped off that bus with nothing but a duffel bag and a heart full of desperate hope. The farm stretches around me in every direction, 200 acres now of productive land that feeds families across 3 states. Emma is 14, already showing the kind of leadership that will serve her well when this responsibility becomes hers. Samuel is 10, fascinated by the technology that makes modern farming possible, but equally drawn to the timeless rhythms of planting and harvest. Margaret is 7, fearless and determined, already insisting she wants to be a farmer like her daddy. The scholarship program has supported over 300 young people now, and our graduates are scattered across the country, building their own farms, starting their own businesses, creating their own families and communities. Maria retired last year as state extension director, but continues to coordinate our mentorship programs. Her own children now part of the extended family that gathers here every Sunday. Ashley serves on the state agricultural board, advocating for policies that support beginning farmers and protect agricultural land. Together, we've created something that exceeds even Ruth's ambitious dreams. Not just a successful farm, but a model for how rural communities can thrive in the modern world while maintaining their essential values. The Basement Archive has become a destination for researchers studying everything from sustainable agriculture to foster care outcomes to rural community development. But it remains, first and foremost, a family museum where our children learn about their heritage and understand their place in a story that stretches back over a century and will continue long after we're gone. Last month, we hosted our 15th annual reunion for scholarship recipients. Over 200 people came, bringing their spouses and children, sharing stories of success and struggle, celebrating the bonds that had formed around this simple idea that everyone deserves a place to belong. Kyle Thompson, our first scholarship recipient, now runs a company that designs sustainable farming systems for operations across the Midwest. He brought his 3 children, who ran through the same fields where their father had learned to believe in his own potential. Maria's protege, a young woman named Sarah, who'd aged out of foster care 5 years ago, announced her engagement to another program graduate, continuing the cycle of healing and hope that Ruth had initiated when she first started searching for me. This place doesn't just change individual lives, Sarah told the group during the reunion dinner. It changes the trajectory of entire families, entire communities. It proves that with the right support and opportunities, people like us can build anything we dream of. She was right. The ripple effects of Ruth's vision had spread far beyond anything we could have imagined. Our graduates were teachers and farmers, entrepreneurs and social workers, parents and community leaders, all of them carrying forward the lessons they'd learned here about hard work, mutual support, and the power of belonging. But perhaps the most meaningful measure of our success wasn't in the numbers or the accolades or the recognition we'd received. It was in the quiet moments. Emma helping a younger child learn to milk a goat, Samuel explaining crop rotation to a group of visiting students, Margaret insisting on carrying her own small bucket to help with evening chores. Our children were growing up with advantages I'd never had, but more importantly, they were growing up with an understanding of their responsibility to others, their connection to the land, their place in a story that was bigger than any individual life. "Tell me again about Great-Grandma Ruth," Margaret asked one evening as I tucked her into bed. I told her the story she'd heard dozens of times but never tired of hearing, about a grandmother who never stopped looking for her lost grandson, about letters what were written but never sent, about a farm kept ready for someone to come home, about love that transcended time and distance, about family that was created through choice rather than blood, about belonging that was earned through dedication and service. "Will you write me letters if I ever get lost?" she asked, her small hand clasped in mine. "You'll never be lost," I promised her. "You'll always know exactly where you belong, exactly who loves you, exactly what your life means." That's the gift Great-Grandma Ruth gave us, and it's the gift we'll give to your children and their children after them. As I walked through the house that night, checking on all three children, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The pain and loneliness of growing up without family, the fear and uncertainty of aging out of foster care, the overwhelming gratitude of discovering that someone had been looking for me, loving me, preparing a place for me all along. The scared 18-year-old who'd first opened that basement door could never have imagined this life. But Ruth had imagined it. In all those letters, in all those years of searching and hoping, she'd imagined exactly this: a family reunited, a farm restored, a community strengthened, a legacy that would continue for generations. Standing on the front porch where she'd once sat and written letters to a grandson she'd never met, I whispered a thank you to the woman who'd made it all possible. Thank you for never giving up, for believing in the power of family, for understanding that home isn't just a place but a feeling, a sense of belonging that can transform everything. The farm will continue long after Ashley and I are gone, passed down to Emma and Samuel and Margaret and their children after them. The scholarship program will keep helping young people build meaningful lives. The community will keep growing and changing while maintaining the essential values that make it special. But tonight, as I lock the doors and turn off the lights in the house that Ruth kept ready for me, I'm simply grateful. Grateful for second chances and found family, for hard work and good soil, for children who will never doubt they belong somewhere, for a love that reached across time to bring me home. If you're watching this and you've ever felt lost or alone, if you've ever wondered if your life has meaning or purpose, I want you to know something. You belong somewhere too. Maybe not on a farm like this one, maybe not in the way my story unfolded, but somewhere there's a place for you, people who will value what you have to contribute, a future that's waiting for you to claim it. Don't give up. Keep looking, keep hoping, keep believing that your story isn't over, that the best chapters might still be ahead of you. And remember that family isn't just about blood, that home isn't just about the place you're born, that belonging is something you can create through love and dedication and service to others. Subscribe if this story touched you and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what home means to you. Share this with someone who needs to hear that they belong somewhere, that their life has value, that love can reach across any distance to bring us home. Because in the end, that's what Ruth's letters taught me. We're never really alone. Love never really died. And somewhere, somehow, there's always a place where we belong.